They weren't just moguls. They were puppet masters, pulling Hollywood's strings while the world obsessed over movie stars. Forget the glittering gowns and Walk of Fame smiles. The real power in old Hollywood belonged to a secretive elite, millionaires who made and broke, legends from the shadows. Ever wondered who really ran the golden age? Who cashed the biggest checks and called the shots while staying out of the camera's glare? Buckle up. You're about to meet 10 hidden titans whose fortunes and secrets ran deeper than any Hollywood plot twist. Louis B. Mayer. Step behind the velvet rope of MGM's Golden Gates, and you'll find the man who was, for decades, Hollywood's ultimate puppet master, Louis B. Mayer. To the public, he was just a studio boss with a sharp suit and a steely smile. But insiders knew better. Mayer was the most powerful and one of the wealthiest men in show business. In fact, for years, he was the highest-paid man in America, earning more than the president, Wall Street bankers, or any leading man on his payroll. Mayer's journey from Russian immigrant to movie mogul is straight out of a Hollywood script. He started in the junk business, scrapping metal and hustling for survival. When he discovered Nickelodeons and the exploding world of silent film, he bet everything on this fad, eventually co-founding Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer in 1924. He didn't just create movies. He created stars, engineering personas from scratch, and wielding contracts like a master chess player. Judy Garland, Clark Gable, and Joan Crawford, Mayer made and broke careers with a phone call. What the public rarely saw was Mayer's obsession with control. He installed secret microphones, monitored employees, and set up ironclad morality clauses. No scandal would touch his empire. While his stars earned headlines and applause, Mayer quietly banked millions. His contract included not just a colossal salary, but a massive slice of MGM's profits, and his investments in real estate and racehorses added millions more to his coffers. Yet Mayer never flashed his wealth. He preferred backroom negotiations to red carpets. It was said that if you wanted anything in Hollywood, from an Oscar to a job, you went through Mayer. By the time he left MGM, he had amassed a fortune so vast that even the IRS struggled to count it. Mayer wasn't just a secret millionaire. He was old Hollywood's undisputed kingpin, a man whose shadow still stretches over Tinseltown. Mary Pickford. Don't let the ringlets and sweet smile fool you. Mary Pickford wasn't just America's first movie sweetheart. She was one of the sharpest, richest power brokers old Hollywood ever produced. While the public swooned over her innocent on-screen persona, Pickford was building an empire behind the scenes, making moves most men in the business wouldn't dare attempt. Pickford started as a child actor, driven by hardship after her father's death, and quickly became the highest-paid actress of her era. But what really set her apart was her business savvy. In an industry that treated women as disposable, Pickford demanded creative control, negotiated unheard-of salaries, and, most radically, fought for a share of her film's profits. She wasn't just cashing studio paychecks. She was investing, producing, and shaping the industry from the boardroom. The turning point came in 1919, when Pickford joined forces with Charlie Chaplin, Douglas Fairbanks, and D.W. Griffith to launch United Artists. Suddenly, she wasn't just a star. She was a studio founder, producing and distributing her own films. This move guaranteed her a steady flow of profits long after her acting career faded, and gave her control over what the world saw on screen. Pickford invested in real estate, bought up swathes of Los Angeles, and became a major player in the city's development. She hosted royalty and politicians at Pikford, her legendary mansion, but she always kept her finances close to the vest. At her peak, she was worth tens of millions, a staggering sum for the 1920s and 1930s, especially for a woman. By the time the talkies took over, Pickford had already secured her legacy as Hollywood's richest and most influential woman. She didn't just run the show, she rewrote the rulebook. In a town built on illusion, Mary Pickford was the real deal, a silent millionaire whose power shaped generations. Samuel Goldwin, Ask any old Hollywood insider who really ran the show, and Samuel Goldwyn's name always comes up, usually with a mix of respect, fear, and a little awe. Goldwyn wasn't born into money, nor did he start as a star. He arrived in America with barely a word of English. Yet by the time the Golden Age was in full swing, he'd turned himself into one of Hollywood's most quietly influential and wealthy figures, earning millions while letting others bask in the spotlight. Goldwyn's genius wasn't just about recognizing talent or making hits. It was about knowing how to own a piece of everything he touched. He co-founded Goldwyn Pictures. The G in MGM is Goldwyn's legacy, and helped launch the Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer juggernaut. But after leaving MGM, Goldwyn didn't fade away. Instead, he created Samuel Goldwyn Productions, and with it, a business model that kept him rolling in cash, while others took the creative risks. What separated Goldwyn from his contemporaries was his insistence on profit participation and ironclad contracts. He was one of the earliest producers to negotiate back-end deals, meaning even when he wasn't hands-on with a film, he was still cashing in on its success. Films like Wuthering Heights, The Best Years of Our Lives, and Guys and Dolls weren't just critical darlings. They were financial goldmines, with Goldwyn taking a sizable chunk of every dollar earned. Goldwyn was famously hard-nosed, quick-tempered, and had a knack for Goldwynisms, his own accidental backwards quotes that became legendary. But beneath the bluster was a man who outmaneuvered almost every rival, amassing a fortune so vast he became a silent force in real estate, banking, and even the early days of television. While others flamed out or fell victim to their own egos, Goldwyn remained a master of reinvention, quietly steering his empire through decades of change. He never needed to be in front of the camera. His power and wealth came from pulling the strings behind it. By the end, Samuel Goldwyn wasn't just rich. He was old Hollywood's ultimate survivor. Jack L. Warner. Step onto the Warner Brothers lot in its heyday, and you could practically feel the presence of Jack L. Warner. Sure, there were 4 Warner Brothers, but Jack was the last man standing, and by far the most ruthless. He didn't just run Warner Brothers. He was Warner Brothers, operating with a combination of charm, cunning, and cold-blooded business acumen that turned the studio into a money machine and made Jack a secret millionaire of staggering proportions. Jack's path to the top wasn't paved with family loyalty. He clawed his way up, sometimes by stepping over his own brothers. When Harry and Albert thought small, Jack dreamed big. He convinced them to bet everything on talking pictures with the jazz singer, launching the sound revolution and leaving other studios scrambling to catch up. That move alone made millions, but Jack was just getting started. Under his watch, Warner Brothers became the studio of gangsters, musicals, and socially conscious blockbusters. Jack was notorious for pinching pennies. Rumor had it he would drive off the lot to avoid picking up the tab at the commissary. But he knew where to spend money, especially when it came to locking in talent or gobbling up theater chains and distribution deals. He negotiated hard, always insisting on a personal cut of the profits and often hiding his full financial stake from the public, and sometimes even his own family. Warner survived the Great Depression, Union Wars, and McCarthyism, all while quietly building an investment portfolio that stretched far beyond Hollywood. When he finally sold his stake in Warner Brothers in the 1960s, Jack walked away with a payout worth hundreds of millions in today's money, most of which he kept out of the public eye. Jack L. Warner wasn't beloved, but he was feared and respected. He turned a family business into a corporate empire and left with enough money to make moguls jealous. In the end, Jack's fortune was as legendary and secretive as his methods. Charlie Chaplin. He made the world laugh, but Charlie Chaplin was dead serious when it came to money. To fans, he was the beloved tramp, a tiny mustache, a bowler hat, slapstick genius. But behind that lovable persona was a sharp business mind, a relentless negotiator, and one of Hollywood's most quietly powerful millionaires. Chaplin's early life reads like a Dickens novel, born in poverty in London, shuffled between orphanages, and hustling for every meal. That hardship forged a survivor's mentality, and by the time he landed in Hollywood, he knew the value of a dollar. His breakout with Keystone Studios was only the beginning. Soon, he was writing, directing, and producing his own films, making sure he owned the rights to every frame. But Chaplin didn't just want a paycheck. He wanted control and profits. In 1919, he co-founded United Artists alongside Mary Pikford, Douglas Fairbanks, and D.W. Griffith. This move let him keep the lion's share of his film's earnings, bypassing the usual studio system and raking in international profits that most stars never saw. Chaplin also invested in land, real estate, and wisely diversified his fortune while others were blowing it on parties and vanity projects. Chaplin's films, The Kid, City Lights, Modern Times, The Great Dictator, were box office gold. But the secret to his lasting wealth was ownership. Long after the silent era ended, Chaplin's movies continued to earn, with re-releases and licensing bringing in new waves of cash. Even exile from the U.S. during the Red Scare couldn't dent his fortune. He simply relocated and managed his assets from Europe, living in quiet luxury. By the time he died, Chaplin's estate was worth tens of millions, much of it carefully hidden in trusts and foreign investments. He may have played a lovable underdog, but in real life, Chaplin was the shrewdest millionaire in the business. Proof that behind every good joke, there's usually a great deal. Irving Thalberg. If you ever wonder how Hollywood went from chaotic startup to a factory of dreams, look no further than Irving Thalberg, the so-called boy wonder of MGM. Thalberg's name might not ring bells outside film circles, but inside the industry, he was the gold standard for both creativity and wealth, wielding influence that made even the most famous stars nervous. While he looked like a mild-mannered executive, Thalberg quietly became one of the richest and most essential men in the studio era, all before his tragic early death. Thalberg started his career young, working for Universal Pictures, before MGM's Louis B. Mayer lured him away. He quickly became the mastermind behind Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer's meteoric rise, personally overseeing scripts, casting, and final edits on the biggest hits of the era. Think Grand Hotel, Mutiny on the Bounty, and The Good Earth. But unlike Mayer, Thalberg shunned the spotlight. He almost never took a producer's credit, letting the movies and profits speak for themselves. The real secret to Thalberg's fortune was his profit participation deals. Decades before this became industry standard, he negotiated a slice of MGM's biggest films, and as the studio raked in record-breaking box office numbers, Thalberg's earnings quietly soared. He also invested in land and properties around Los Angeles, understanding the city's explosive growth could mint millionaires for those who got in early. Despite recurring health problems and a reputation as a gentle soul, Thalberg was relentless when it came to his business interests. He worked insane hours, often sleeping on the studio lot, always in pursuit of the next hit. When he died at just 37, his estate was worth millions, almost unimaginable for someone his age at that time. Hollywood named its most prestigious producing award after him. But the real tribute might be the financial template he set: power from the shadows, wealth by design, and influence that endures far beyond the credits. Howard Hughes. No one in old Hollywood, maybe no one in American history, was quite like Howard Hughes. To the tabloids, he was the reclusive billionaire playboy, obsessed with planes, movies, and women. But behind the wild headlines was a shrewd and secretive business operator who made, and lost, fortunes while rewriting the rules for both cinema and industry. Hughes inherited millions from his father's tool company, but quickly set his sights on Hollywood. He bought RKO Pictures, one of the Big Five studios, and started pouring his wealth into daring, often controversial productions like Hell's Angels, Scarface, and the Jane Russell vehicle, The Outlaw. These movies shattered taboos, pushed censorship boundaries, and, when they hit, brought in mountains of cash. Hughes was infamous for demanding absolute creative control and personally overseeing every detail, from camera angles to costume fittings, ensuring that the films reflected his unique and often bizarre vision. But Hughes's real genius was in business maneuvering. He quietly acquired vast amounts of RKO stock, real estate, and even aviation assets, using shell companies and secret trusts to keep the true scale of his wealth hidden from both rivals and the government. Even as his personal life spiraled into eccentricity, becoming a germaphobe recluse, disappearing for months at a time, his fortune kept multiplying, thanks to shrewd investments and licensing deals. Hughes outlasted the Golden Age, surviving antitrust suits, studio wars, and public scandal, always managing to stay just one step ahead of disaster. By the time he withdrew from public life completely, his Hollywood holdings alone were worth hundreds of millions, a staggering sum in the 1950s and 60s. Some say Hughes used Hollywood as a playground. In reality, he was its secret kingmaker, a man who played the industry as skillfully as any actor ever played a part. Adolf Zukor. Adolf Zukor's name is rarely splashed across classic movie posters, but his fingerprints are all over Hollywood's rise. Born in Hungary, Zukor arrived in America with little more than ambition and a knack for seeing what others missed. By the 1920s, he'd quietly become one of the richest and most powerful men in the industry, all while letting others soak up the limelight. Zukor's start wasn't glamorous. He worked in fur and penny arcades before betting everything on the new art of moving pictures. In 1912, he founded Famous Players Film Company, which soon merged into what we know today as Paramount Pictures. But Zukor wasn't content to just produce films. He pioneered vertical integration, snapping up not just studios, but distribution companies and theater chains. Suddenly, Zukor controlled the whole process, from the camera lens to the box office cash register. While his stars basked in fame, Zukor was making bank. By the 1920s and 30s, Paramount was a behemoth, churning out hit after hit and dominating American screens. Zukor negotiated equity deals, profit shares, and insider investments, amassing a fortune that dwarfed many of the era's more visible celebrities. Insiders knew Zukor didn't just make movies. He owned the theaters you watch them in, and the companies that shipped the prints across America. Zukor's business acumen made him a legend in studio boardrooms, but he was famously private, preferring quiet meetings and backroom deals over flashy premieres. He survived the Great Depression, weathered antitrust lawsuits, and even outlasted rivals as the studio system crumbled. By the time he stepped down, Zukor's personal wealth was counted in tens of millions, and his influence lingered long after. While he never courted attention, Zukor was the kind of secret millionaire who truly ran Hollywood, a silent tycoon whose empire outlasted almost everyone. Douglas Fairbanks. To moviegoers, Douglas Fairbanks was the ultimate daredevil, the original action star who leapt across rooftops and sliced his way through adventure after adventure. But what the public didn't see was Fairbanks's keen eye for business and his silent determination to keep his fortune off the front page. He was a secret millionaire, not just because of his box office hits, but because he saw opportunities where others saw only fame. Fairbanks' story is classic Hollywood. Stage actor turned film star, he became the face of early adventure cinema, with hits like The Mark of Zorro, Robin Hood, and The Thief of Baghdad. But Fairbanks knew that relying solely on studios meant ceding both profits and control. So, in 1919, he joined forces with Mary Pikford, Charlie Chaplin, and D.W. Griffith to launch United Artists, a game-changing move that put profits and creative control directly into his hands. Fairbanks didn't squander his paychecks. Instead, he invested in prime Los Angeles real estate, bought large stakes in production and distribution companies, and diversified his wealth across industries. Pickfair, the mansion he built with Pikford, became a symbol of Hollywood power and opulence. But the real story was the business empire he was quietly building behind closed doors. As his career slowed in the 1930s, Fairbanks's investments continued to pay off. Unlike many silent stars who faded into obscurity or bankruptcy, Fairbanks stayed wealthy, thanks to shrewd decisions and a refusal to rely on fleeting celebrity. He kept a low profile in financial matters, quietly managing his fortune even as his swashbuckling days ended. By the time he died, Fairbanks had secured his place as both a Hollywood legend and a quiet millionaire. He proved that sometimes the greatest stunts aren't on the screen, but in the boardroom, where the real action and the real riches live. William Randolph Hearst. You know his name from newspapers, politics, and maybe even Citizen Kane. But what most people never realized was just how deeply William Randolph Hearst's millions flowed through the veins of old Hollywood. Hearst didn't just own headlines. He funded films, bankrolled studios, and shaped careers from the wings, quietly wielding more power than most moguls ever dreamed. Hearst's Hollywood involvement started as a vanity project. He wanted his mistress, Marion Davies, to become a star. So, he founded Cosmopolitan Pictures, spent lavishly on productions, and made sure his newspaper empire promoted Davies's every move. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. Hearst became a behind-the-scenes player in financing and distribution, rescuing struggling studios, and even brokering deals between rival executives. His money flowed everywhere, into massive studio lots, palatial mansions, and high-stakes loans that kept major productions afloat during lean times. Industry insiders knew, if Hearst backed you, doors opened. If he didn't, your career could hit a dead end. Yet, in public, he preferred to let the stars and moguls take the bows, while he raked in silent profits. Hearst's real estate holdings in California, including the legendary Hearst Castle, were just the most visible part of a sprawling empire that stretched coast to coast. He leveraged his media clout to sway public opinion about films, actors, and industry scandals, all while turning a healthy profit on the side. His political and social influence made him nearly untouchable, even as his finances grew complicated in his later years. By the end, Hearst had funneled untold millions through Hollywood, shaping the industry's rise and fall. He was the archetype of a secret millionaire, a man with wealth, power, and control, who could make or break careers, often with a single, whispered command. In a town built on illusion, Hearst was the invisible hand guiding the magic. The glitz of old Hollywood hid a deeper game, one played by secret millionaires who built empires behind the curtain. The stars you know lit up the screen, but these power brokers pulled the strings and cashed the biggest checks. Which hidden mogul shocked you most? Drop your thoughts in the comments, subscribe for more, and share if you crave Hollywood's untold stories. Remember, in Tinseltown, the real legends often stayed just out of the spotlight.